And another great simplicity of this garment is that there are only 2 different rows. The first is a simple garter stitch row, and I'll be doing 4 of those to start. Knitting each of the stitches on the row. And this again gives a really stable but slightly stretchy edge to the piece, and it helps to frame the looser lace stitches, which might get out of shape after time if they were worked without a slight border. That's my 4 rows of garter stitch there. I can now start on the other row that is worked throughout the rest of the rectangular piece until 4 rows before the end, when you start working the garter stitch border. So it has an edging, a kind of selvage of the three stitches of garter stitch, and then the repeat is to knit 1, yarn over and knit 2 together. Knit 1, yarn over and knit 2 together. And that's all you do throughout the pattern. You're doing your 3 stitches of garter stitch here, knit 1, yarn over and knit 2 together, and you repeat that until you get 3 stitches before the end, when you're going to make another three stitches of garter stitch border. So that's the last repeat there. You can see the eyelets forming as you go along, and then the garter stitch for the last 3 stitches, the plain knit stitch all along. And all the other rows are exactly the same, so you'll be working the front and back alike. It's very much like garter stitch, just with the yarn overs in place and the knit 2s to reduce the stitch count after adding the yarn over. So again, 3 stitches of garter stitch for the border, and then knit 1, yarn over, and then knit together the stitch and the yarn over from the previous round. Knit 1, yarn over and knit 2 together. When I get to the last 3, again, they're in garter stitch. So that's the repeat, and you can now see the results of knitting the yarn over into a knit 2 together and adding another yarn over there. You're getting a slightly zigzag effect forming there, and that's going to be the same all the way up. It'll zig and zag backwards and forwards like a ladder, and you'll have these little panels of garter stitch which look slightly diagonal. They look almost like a cable, really. So this is a great pattern to work, a stitch pattern to work when you want something lacy but you want something easy to work on. It would be a good knitting project to take to a knitting group, or to do while watching television, or for commuting, for example, something where you might not have 100% of your attention on the project, or may have to stop suddenly. You can usually work out quite easily where you are, because it'll become very familiar quite quickly, where you're working over a stitch repeat of just 3 stitches and a row repeat of just 1 row. You'll quickly recognise what you're doing here. I think it's an ideal project for a new knitter, somebody who wants to make a garment for the first time, maybe somebody who wants to try their hand at lace knitting for the first time, hasn't tried it before. This would be a really ideal project to start on. One of the things I did find with this pattern is that it was easy sometimes, if I wasn't concentrating, to forget to do the yarn over, and then it was also fairly easy for me to pick up the yarn over without having to go back and unpick. So I'll show that as well. Something that happened now and then while working on it. And I do like to find, if I can, a way of avoiding going back and unpicking lots and lots of yarn, and then having to try and get it all back together again. So if I forget the yarn over here on the last repeat and just knit these two together after knitting one, you can see that it's, here we have groups of a knit, a yarn over and a knit, a knit, a yarn over and a knit all the way along, but here we've just got the 2 knit stitches. And then I'll work the garter stitch selvage. So moving over onto the next side, when I've worked the 3 garter stitches there and the first knit one, I'll notice I don't have a yarn over to knit together with this stitch. And so very simply all I do is pull the stitch down, tuck the hook in from the back, and that gives me my yarn over, which I can put back on there, and I'm ready to knit those two together. So pulling it down, lifting that from the back and putting it back on the needle, and you can see that there looks exactly like the yarn over here. It doesn't overstretch the fabric either, as long as you don't do it too often. But don't forget to make your yarn over on this row as well. And yeah, you can see that you would never notice that that was picked up after the fact. So while it's quite easy to pick up a yarn over if you drop it, exactly like when we picked up the one that we'd lost, if you drop your yarn over, it just hides in front of the stitch there and it looks a little bit lower. So you can push that up and again come back in with the needle. And you can see it's the stitch that belongs there because it's twisting around with this one. So you come under it with the needle and place it back on there, and it's really easy to do. But if as a beginner somebody was not confident with that, a good tip would be to use a lifeline in the knitting. A lifeline in the knitting is a strand of usually finer thread than the yarn that you're working with that you weave through each of the stitches on a particular row where you know that this row is okay, and if you make a mistake subsequently you can pick all the way back to that row and you know you've got all your stitches in the right direction and easy to pick up. So if you want to add a lifeline and you've got interchangeable needles, it's very easy to put a piece of thread through the hole that's used to tighten the needles. You can put a little piece of thread just through that hole there, and as you knit it pulls the thread through the stitches on that particular row. So you can do that at the start, maybe in the garter stitch row, and then after you've done 10 rows pop another one through and just keep some thread handy. It could just be sewing thread, it could be some crochet thread, or perhaps some unwanted very fine yarn. And then if you do that every 10 rows or 20 rows or whatever you'd be happy to unpick if you went wrong, you know that you'll be able to pick back at any time to that row if you had a lot of stitches ladder back down or you weren't able to pick up the yarn overs. So let's have a look at that now. This is a design where you really do need to block the lace to see the finished result. You can see as I start to stretch that, if that was dampened and pinned out, you get a much more open result than when you just see it being knitted like this. And that was really lovely to see come to life in the dark blue yarn as well. And once you've done that, you have a really nice, easy to seam piece of knitting.